When Marvel Comics announced the new creative team behind Amazing Spider-Man was going to be Zeb Wells and John Romita Jr., I was pretty excited. I don't particularly like John Romita Jr.'s art at this time, but Zeb Wells was coming off a fantastic run on Hellions, and it felt like he had earned this promotion up the ladder. This week we got The Amazing Spider-Man #1. This comic book is interesting. Let's put it that way. I don't think the art helps it, but certainly the story is not what I wanted out of a #1 issue. He's doing a mystery box storyline. Like, something's out there and you need to discover it. If you read the first issue, you must get to the end type of thing. Ben Percy does that kind of stuff a lot on his Wolverine and X-Force series. And I'm definitely conflicted about the future of The Amazing Spider-Man under Zeb Wells. I think he made some very bad choices regarding Peter Parker himself. Making Peter Parker an asshole, I just don't think really works. Obviously, he's been an asshole in the past. Really, if you read the first, 30, maybe 40 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man back in the day, he's kind of an asshole. But he hasn't really been that character for a really, really long time, other than when his body was inhabited by Doc Ock, in Superior Spider-Man, then he was an asshole. But obviously, that wasn't Peter. That was Doc Ock. So I don't think this is a good interpretation of Peter Parker, and I certainly don't like what they've done with MJ, and I don't even know what the fuck's going on. And I don't mean that in a good way. I don't mean I was like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what's going on, but I know I want to read it. It's like, I don't know what's going on, and I don't think I want to continue. Even after the first issue, it kind of sucks to feel that way, especially when you were looking forward to something. This is something that I thought was going to be really good. Zeb Wells has worked on Spider-Man before. He certainly did perfectly fine work in the past. He was coming off that Hellions run, like I mentioned, that was great. John Romita Jr.'s best work was always on Spider-Man. He's past his prime, but I was willing to kind of deal with it for a good story. And I don't think what we're getting, at least at the start, is a good story. Time will tell if I stick around. Let's talk about why I feel that way. As I mentioned, Peter Parker is pretty much an asshole through the entire The Amazing Spider-Man #1, except for one instance, which I definitely will cover, which I thought was a cool thing to do with Peter in the comic book story. There's something I liked in here, but it was so brief, it's almost not worth it. When we open up, we see he's in the crater. He's outside of York, Pennsylvania. Something has happened. Something's blown up. And then we jump forward 6 months, and everyone hates Peter Parker. After this happened, he just checked out of life for 6 months. That means he's on the outs with MJ, who does not want to speak to him. It almost feels like maybe she's the only person that he's tried to contact over the past 6 months. But she lets Peter know, under no circumstances, call me again. I don't ever want to speak to you again. I do not like this portrayal of their relationship. Peter Parker and MJ have been through enough. They've had their marriage destroyed. Writers refused to put the couple back together for years and years and years. It felt like Nick Spencer was fixing that, and now we're back to the way it was. Peter's an asshole. Peter's a bad guy. No one likes Peter, and even MJ has given up on Peter Parker because apparently whatever he's done the past 6 months is just completely unforgivable. That's the big mystery box. You got to learn what happened 6 months ago and whatever the fallout of it is. And there's definitely fallout besides the fact that MJ will not speak to Peter. Apparently, she's married now. I'm assuming she's married to this guy. And these two kids come running in, and they call her mommy, and she says kiddos, and they're having hugs and stuff like this. Did someone destroy the timeline again? A lot of things can happen in a 6 month period, but I just don't think MJ could actually birth preteen and toddler kids in the meantime. I guess there is the potential that she met this man who's a widow, and maybe they fell madly in love, and now the kids are calling her mommy because maybe they got married and she adopted them or something. But this is awful. Not that she's a mommy. She should be a mom. Where's Mayday? The Peter Parker Mary Jane marriage needs to be reconstituted. It needs to be brought back into the reality of the 616, and their kid needs to come back. This is a terrible, terrible decision. It just turns me off to the entire series and wanting to read it moving forward. This was the last page in the comic. I think it's supposed to make you think, wow, how did this happen? And all this makes me want to do is never buy the comic book again and just wait for the next creative team and see if they will try and fix the fucking relationship. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just MJ that fucking hates Peter's guts. It's actually Aunt May, the one character that would really never give up on Peter. Peter could do everything wrong. He could be late for everything. He could blow up her house or something, and Aunt May would always forgive him, but not anymore. Apparently, Peter is an enormous liar. She's tired of not hearing the truth. She tells him, you can come over to dinner on Saturday, but I won't hold my breath because I know you're going to lie to me and you're not going to show up. And he is a cocksucker in this comic book. He comes off as an incredibly large douchebag, except for one interaction. I'm definitely going to talk about that because it's the only thing about the comic book that I like. I understand the nature of Peter Parker is tragic in itself. He's trying to do the right thing and something bad happens. I understand bringing Peter down to a lower level, but this might be too low. The Human Torch doesn't like him either. Johnny Storm is like, what is up with you? His old roommate, his friend Randy, who's been paying his rent for 6 months, even though we didn't hear from him, doing him a solid, wants to tell him that he's going to get married. He's about to pop the question. Peter's got no time for him. We have Johnny Storm arrive, be like, what is wrong with you? You stole from us. What is happening? You screwed your life up. And he's like, I'm not speaking to you. I don't need you or anyone else to help me out, and hit the bricks. Such a weird portrayal of Peter Parker and his relationships with his friends and family. Normally when Peter hits rock bottom, it's a misunderstanding, but the fallout ends up costing him some relationships, but Peter's never in the wrong, but he's absolutely in the wrong here. He is just a bad person. If you want to read a comic book about what a dickhead Peter Parker is, this is the comic book for you. That's probably why it's not the comic book for me. I did mention earlier, there's one interaction that I think is really well done. It's between Peter and Tombstone, and even this feels a little bit out of character, but I thought it was good character progression that felt pretty exciting for this new age of Peter Parker. More of this and way less of that, and you'll probably have yourself a successful comic book. But Tombstone wants to talk to Peter to warn Spider-Man that there's a war coming. Spider-Man did something, and Peter promises that he will deliver the message. And he comes off as cool under pressure when he's in this conversation with Tombstone. I thought it was really well done. He kind of laughs at him with what he's saying. Tombstone says something funny. He replies, it's just that Spider-Man was telling me the other day how he doesn't have a lot going on. He's been dying to do something. So yeah, I'll tell him you're coming. And he's going to love it. That kind of feels out of character, but I kind of like the balls. I kind of like the moxie on old Peter Parker right here. This is the kind of stuff I can get behind. And this is easily the best part of the entire comic book. Unfortunately, it's only 2 pages. As I just mentioned, there is a war coming between Tombstone and the Rose Gang. And I guess this is all fallout because of what Spider-Man did when he accidentally saw what was going on. There's an arms deal, and Tombstone's lieutenant, White Rabbit, was going to sell a goblin glider to the Rose Gang. Spider-Man shows up and kind of foils it. We saw that in the previews of the comic book, and that's what's going on, and that's why Tombstone blames Spider-Man for this gang war that's going to be happening in New York, that Spider-Man obviously is going to be a part of. He's going to be in the middle of it. I'm showing you this particular page for a reason. The art in here by John Romita Jr. I do think is better than what he did, let's say, on Superman Year One with Frank Miller, but it's not much better. If you like lots of crosshatches, which is certainly part of John Romita's style, you'll probably like this. If you like kind of weird big blockheads, you're going to like this. This next page I'm going to show you, this is the best piece of art in the entire comic book, and this isn't so bad. You can tell that he still has a pretty decent feel for Spider-Man when he wants to. The moment where Spider-Man lands on the roof of the car, I think looks pretty good. I still say the faces are off. They don't look all that great. But judging from the comic book and the fact that John Romita Jr. likely had more time to finish this issue, they don't have time to finish anything else. This is probably the best you're going to get in this Amazing Spider-Man run from John Romita Jr. as the artist. If you like this, and you like the blockheads and stuff like this, you're probably going to like the art, and it's not going to throw you off. John Romita Jr. is a legend in comic books, but he's a little bit past his prime, and I don't think his time at DC Comics did him any favors. I don't think he liked those characters nearly as much as he liked Spider-Man and the Marvel Comics characters, although he did do some pretty decent work on Batman. I'm not going to just discredit everything he did at DC Comics because there was some pretty okay work there. If you like John Romita Jr.'s art style, if you like crosshatch and you think this is good, you probably like the art. Wasn't really my style, but that's fine. I don't know how to feel about this comic book. There's some things about it, 2 pages, that I like, but there's a lot about it that I don't like. You present this mystery, and it's supposed to keep me around to the next issue, but I don't like this version of Peter Parker. He's an asshole. Do I really want to go pay money to read about a shitty version of Peter Parker where I can go back and read 60 years worth of history with the character, and a lot of those times there were multiple series that were good featuring Peter Parker as Spider-Man coming out? There are plenty of Spider-Man comics I can go out and read. Marvel Comics and Zeb Wells, you need to give me a reason to read this one. And if this is the Peter Parker and that's the big mystery, and it feels like we're in some type of weird multiverse thing where nothing makes sense, I'm already reading that in the X-Men and I fucking hate it. I'm not looking to double down on that kind of content. In many ways, I think this falls flat. I'm not going to recommend it. I think it's maybe like a 2.5 star, 3 star out of 5 comic book. I think the art's not very good. I don't think the story's very compelling. There's some interesting stuff going on here that could be a good story. But Zeb Wells' interpretation of Spider-Man in this comic book, I just don't like. And I certainly hate the stuff with MJ. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. But I don't know if I'm going to be along for issue number 2. Spider-Man's not one of those characters that I love so much that I'm willing to stick around even for a couple of extra issues if I think it's a bad start. You know what I mean? I'll do that for Batman. I'll do that for X-Men comics and stuff like that. But I like Spider-Man, but I don't like him that much. A lot of you probably know this, but I personally think that Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, written and illustrated by Chip Zdarsky, is maybe the best comic book that's been released in the last 5 or 6 years. It's absolutely brilliant. It's easily 5-star. It's the best Spider-Man comic, like single issue, probably in a decade. I made this video a couple of years ago talking about the comic book. It's only 5 or 6 minutes, but it really highlights everything I love about the comic book and why I think it's essentially flawless. If you love Spider-Man, if you've never read Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man 310, definitely check this out. You might want to go pick it up.